Cool. Thank you. Yeah, cheers guys. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I would normally not be wearing a hat, but my hair is so unbelievably long and out of shape that the hat has to stay on. And I've continued to say to my wife that she's not allowed to cut it. So it's gonna get a lot longer before all this is over. So I want to talk about, I guess, remote work and just, a lot of our views on the kind of current situation that we find ourselves in. The first thing I wanted to start by saying is anyone that's out there, working in a business, running a business, whatever it is, I think being really honest and open to each other and to our teams is really important, because this is bloody hard. It's not that much fun. Yes, there are many great stories out there of optimism and opportunity that's going to come out of all of this, which is absolutely true, and I fully believe. But I just don't think this is a time for any of us to put on any face or bravado or anything like that. What we're going through as individuals and what the country and what the world is going through is really, really difficult. And I think being honest and open with yourself and with our businesses about that is really, really important. And I guess I'll come on to why I think that's so important later on. Personally, I have really good days. I have really bad days. I have days when I wake up and I've got lots of energy and I want to get stuck into it. But I also have days where I just can't be bothered as much. And thankfully, I'm having a good day today. So hopefully this will be useful. One of the things that I'm hearing a lot from the businesses that we work with, so, we're an HR platform. We work with 2,000 businesses across the UK, small businesses from, 5 to 100, is I hear people saying we're really well set up for remote work, which is great. I love the optimism. But I think the reality is, in those circumstances, what they're talking about is technology. They're talking about the systems that they've got in place to do remote work. They're talking about the Zoom that they're using, or Google Meet, or Slack, or Google Drive, or whatever file sharing software platform you're using. I'm absolutely not endorsed. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about the technology. They're not really talking about culture. And when any business goes through any difficult time or challenging time, I do really believe that it is culture that is the key thing that's going to help us get through that moment. And that's a lot more important than technology. So I think there are 3 layers that we all have to understand that are part of what's going on right now. This is not a simple issue. This is a very complex issue. There's never been a time before in my lifetime, probably in many of the lifetimes of the people that are listening, where we've been through something so collectively as a world. And there are 3 levels. The first level is, yes, as organizations, we are working in a remote context. We are sitting at home. Some of us have amazing work from home setups. Some of us don't. Some of us are living alone. Some of us are living with a family, with a partner. Some of us are living with friends. We're working remotely. And I think that as that top level, that's probably the easiest thing for us to think about and for us to understand. That's the simplest. But I think it gets a lot more complex than that. The second level is that we're also isolated. So this is where we start to get onto, I guess why I title this talk and what I'm sharing with you. This is not just remote work, because there are these deeper levels to what's happening. As individuals, we're isolated from friends, from family, and from the things that we would normally want to spend our time doing. And maybe we're not talking about it a lot, but that is going to have a huge impact and a huge effect on our teams and our businesses, and most importantly, our people. My biggest passion in what we do at Charlie and what I've done in my career is people. That's what gets me really excited. That's what I love, is seeing people progress and develop and make progress in their careers. And a lot of those people right now are really suffering because there's this isolation. We don't have the opportunity to spend time face to face in real life with other human beings. So that's the second layer. Also because of this, some of those tools and mechanisms that we have in our lives that maybe help us feel really good, we don't have access to. Going to a bar with friends, going out for dinner with people, going to the gym, going to the cinema, going to the theater, going out shopping, rolling around town, whatever it is that you like to do or you want to do. Isolation is getting in the way of that happening. So that first layer is we're remote. The second layer is that we're isolated. But the third layer is that there's this constant context that we're all living through, which is that as the background to all of this, there's a steady stream of negative, difficult, sad news. And I think this is probably the area that maybe we're not talking about as much, but I think that is one of the areas that we all need to be really, really aware of. There is a challenging and difficult context, which is probably affecting all of us in ways that we don't necessarily realize. When was the last time you opened up a newspaper and you read a positive story, or you went on Twitter and you found something that maybe wasn't corona related in the news? There's just this constant context of difficult and maybe sad things happening in the world. Then there's another branch to this area, which is that everyone's context is different. And as businesses and as companies, this is such an important thing to understand, which is that the office is an amazing crutch. The office is this incredible place where we kind of even the playing field. We give everyone a similar setup. Everyone has access to the same amenities. There isn't this difference that everyone being remote and isolated has created. Some people have got a shed at the bottom of their garden, which is an amazing place to work. Some people are working in their kitchen like I am. Those are my spatulas behind me. And maybe they've got other people working on that table with them as well. Maybe they share a house and there's 3 or 4 people in the house that all need a setup and all need to open up their laptops. Maybe they've got kids running around that they need to go and homeschool. Maybe they've got loved ones who are working in the front line, working in the NHS, working in a care home, who are directly impacted and trying to stave off COVID-19 on a daily basis. Maybe they've lost someone because of the virus. Everyone's context is so vastly different now than it was 3 months ago. And I think that's just such an important thing for us all to understand. If you're not going into your day knowing that everyone in your team is going to be responding or reacting to this in a different way, then you're going to find it really, really difficult, because everyone's context is different and everyone's experience of this is incredibly unique to them. And as leaders, we have to show a ton of empathy. So we kind of maybe went into this as business leaders thinking, okay, we just got to work from home for a couple of months. That's probably doable. And as I just kind of outlined there in those 3 levels, there are some nuances that we have to think about. We've got to think about, the remote aspect, so the technology perspective. We've got to think about the isolation and the effect that that's having on our team. And we've got to think about the context that we're all experiencing, but also is slightly different for people dependent on their setup and their situation. So that forces us to go a level deeper. It forces us to think in a bit more depth about the scenario and the situation that we find ourselves in. So having considered that, how do we actually get ourselves set up for remote work? And you remember at the start of this talk, I said, this is not just about technology, this is about culture. And so that's where I think we will start. To get ourselves set up properly, rather than thinking about technology, we've got to think about our culture. Sarah, let me bring you in. If I said to you, what is culture? What would you say?
Gotta start with a difficult one, eh? I mean, for us, culture's this topic of kind of culture and what is culture and how culture means different things to different businesses. There's so many elements to what culture can be and sits for different businesses. I think right now for us, it's making sure that we live by, for us, 6 and Flow values, the culture that we have fostered within a physical space, and how that translates and transitions into the culture that we now have remote working. So that's still kind of focused on transparency, communication, alignment, all of those kind of really big things that we kind of continually work on when we have a physical office space. That's still relevant now we're remote. So what kind of culture means to different businesses is kind of there's a lot of answers to that, but for us it's kind of making sure that all of the things we had in place whilst we had a physical space are now still in place. We're remotely, it doesn't make any difference in that sense. So there's difficulties around it, but for us, that's where we need to ensure that kind of culture continues. And that, the communication's there, transparency is there, that we are, that we're making sure we're still really focused on the values we have as a business.
So that was a great answer, and it's a great answer because it's a difficult answer. It's a difficult question to answer, right? You said a lot of stuff in that answer, right? And that's the reality. You ask anyone about culture, you're going to get a slightly different answer. Because for some reason, we let culture become this kind of like fluffy thing up in the air that we know it's there. We don't necessarily know how to get a handle on it. So we spent the last year thinking about that. And I'm not saying that we're perfect. I'm not saying that we're right. But to us, culture is 3 things. Culture is your people, it's your policies and your process. We put people up at the front there because the biggest thing that you can do in any organization to think and consider your culture is to hire right. It's amazing how quickly a culture can be impacted in a negative way when you bring the wrong person into a business. You bring the right people into the business, what an impact that has on culture. So people up at the front there. The second thing is your policies. And I don't see necessarily policies as this very black and white document type of thing. What I'm talking about is, what do we do and what don't we do? So policies is anything that we say we do, and it's anything that we say we don't do. So that can be stuff that's written down. It could be a mental health policy. It could be a sabbatical policy. It could be your holiday policy, your review and remuneration policy. But it also could be unwritten rules. So feedback, we do a lot of feedback. It's not a policy, but it is in our definition because it's something that we define. Values and behaviors also sit within this. Values and behaviors are things where we say this is how we behave in the organization. This is how we see the world. This is what means something to us. It's a policy. And then the last area is process. So how do we work? What's the nuance to the way that this organization comes together? Do you use objectives and OKRs? Do you have a kind of weekly goal methodology where you kind of share what everyone's working on? Do you come together for full company meetings once a week, once a year, once a quarter? What are the ways of operating? Yes, there's lots of stuff that sits around the edge, but these are the 3 key pillars. You think about these, you get these right, you can either turn your culture into an amazing asset, or you can get it wrong and make it something that hinders you rather than helps you. So we look at those 3 things: people, policy, and process. Now, we can't really necessarily right now do anything about your people. This is the hardest one for us to change, right? Unless you wanted to get rid of some people in your business and bring in new people, this is a hard one for us to grapple around. So where I want to focus, because not a lot of companies are hiring right now, I want to focus on policies and process. I think these are the things that right now, in this moment, in this challenging time we find ourselves in, these are the 2 where we can have the biggest impact. So we look at policies first. I think the biggest thing that we are all struggling with at the moment is how we feel inside of our heads, is our mental health, is our emotional well-being. There are some of us who are incredibly aware of our mental health, and there are others that are less aware. Whether you're aware or you're not, I guarantee you everyone's mental health is being affected in some form. And so if I was going to start as a kind of recommendation of how we really get set up for remote work, how we can be really agile in this challenging time that we find ourselves in, a mental health policy is the first place that I would start. One of the things that we do at Charlie is we have the ability for people on the team to book personal days. These are not a sick day, it's not holiday, it's a personal day. It's a day for them. And we talk about them very specifically in relation to mental health. And so when someone books one, one of the things our product does is it kind of sends a notification out via email or Slack, however you want to have it set up, to say, hey, this person's off sick, or this person's on holiday, or this person's booked a personal day. Now, when someone sees X person has booked a personal day, we instinctively know that it's most likely something to do with their emotional well-being or mental health. And that's really important, because I think across companies in the UK and elsewhere, Amsterdam, Ireland, we've got a big job to do on demystifying and destigmatizing mental health and emotional well-being. And COVID-19 has made that more important than ever, because suddenly how we are feeling and how we're experiencing this is more obvious to us than it was before. Why? Because of that number 2 point that I had above, isolation. We can't go and do all the things that we were doing previously to kind of take our minds off how we're feeling. We're at home, or we're out on our kind of sanctioned hour of exercise a day. But otherwise, yeah, a lot of the time we're left to deal with our feelings and to deal with how we're experiencing this. And so I think people are really, we're definitely seeing this. People are they're really feeling it. And so if you've not got a mental health policy, this is absolutely something I would think about. And one of the things that we'll do, Rich and Sarah, is we'll send you a bunch of policy templates for you guys to send everyone after this. So if you've not got a mental health policy, don't worry, we'll send you one that you can use. But I think this is really important. I think the second policy area that's equally important at the moment to make sure we're really doing the best we can to set ourselves up for being able to work like this is behaviors and values. Now, this is not a time for any of us to decide to come up with new values or if you've never been through the process, now's not the time to write them. But I would say two things. If you've got values or behaviors, and maybe they're on a presentation somewhere, they're not something that you talk about that much, they've kind of gotten forgotten, now's the time to start talking about them. Now is the time to bring them to the fore. And to use them in everyday language across the business, and to make them something that people can use to make decisions and navigate the situation. If you've never been through that exercise of creating values for your organization, then, and like I said, now's not the time to maybe do it. The reality is that even if you think you don't have them, you do have them. I bet if you spoke to your team and said, hey, if we had to put our values down on a piece of paper, what would they be? I bet there'd be some consensus. And so maybe now's the time to unearth those. Why are values and behaviors important? Well, they help with that sense of community. They help with decision making. They help us make sense of what's around us. And right now, those values and behaviors are going to be more useful to you and the team than they were previously. So that was some ideas on policy. I've got a great blog post I can share in terms of how to think about values and how to use them. Let's just look quickly at process before I kind of finish up and we take some questions. So in terms of process and what areas of process I think are most important, what themes are most important, I think the first one is alignment. All of us use the office as a crutch. We use it as a thing that helps us stay roughly aligned and kind of know what's going on, because we're all sitting in the same space and we all kind of like, we can hear, we eavesdrop, we're all nosy, we can hear what other people are working on, what the teams are doing. We kind of stay roughly aligned. That's all disappeared. There's no water cooler, there's no coffee breaks, there's no eavesdropping. But in a time of uncertainty and in a time of challenge, alignment is probably more important than ever. In a time where we all need to be pulling together within our business units to like do good work and achieve things and move ourselves in a positive direction, alignment is really key. So for us, that's really simple. We do that in kind of three key ways. First way is every team sets a number of goals for the week, and all those goals can be seen in a spreadsheet that everyone's got access to. So if anyone wants context on what different teams are working on, they can see that. We set those goals at the end of the week as a group of team leads, and that's kind of part of our weekly rhythm. The second thing we do is a full company stand up every morning. Now, we did this when we were in the office. We still do this now. We're a 30-person company. We're not massive, but I've seen it work at companies that are 100, 150 even. So it can work. And it works pretty well digitally. It works amazing on Zoom, works amazing on Google Meet. And each team quickly spins around and shares kind of key highlight from the day before, or if they've got any blockers on any of those goals. We do that every morning at 10 o'clock. And what it means is we all start the day together, which is great, helps with staying on the same page, but we're also just clocking in and picking up that context. And then the third thing we do is we finish the week together. So 4:45 on a Friday, each team goes around and shares their kind of wins, their fails, and their learnings from the week. Now, that's kind of context and communication that we were doing before this all started, and it's context and communication that we're still carrying on now. Why? Because keeping everyone aligned and on the same page is more important than ever. Communication. In terms of how we work and the process of how we work, I think being really considerate in terms of our communication style is key. You know, one of the things that you'll hear from people that are real remote working champions and experts is asynchronous communication. So the ability to not necessarily have to have everyone on a call at the same time, but actually to allow people, let's say you've got a big decision to make, to write up a document about that decision, circulate that, and then let people dip into that document, read it, and comment on their own time, rather than everyone having to come together on a meeting. So people are going to have different schedules because they might be caring for someone, they might have kids, they might be volunteering, they might be dropping off food to a neighbor. So allowing for asynchronous communication is really important. The second thing is just being aware of what energy different styles of communication take. Personally, and there's been a lot of stuff out there at the moment, 6 hours of video calls a day is pretty exhausting. And this is my second webinar of the day. And I had a couple of video calls this morning. So yeah, I'm kind of reaching my limit. After this, I'm done. No more video calls. Maybe do phone calls when it's just 2 people, or even when it's 3 people. Maybe don't do video all the time. So I think being really aware of what types of communication are energy draining and energy giving is important, and just also remind yourself that that's going to be different for different people. And then I think the last thing that's most important when it comes to communication, now is the time to be transparent. Now is not the time to hide numbers and figures and to not be clear on why decisions have been made. Now's the time to be really open, really transparent. We all have had hard decisions to make, but we're going to have harder decisions to make down the line. And so leaning on openness and transparency means that you're going to optimize for trust within the team. And I think that's really key. If you do those things, I think that's when we can be well set up for remote work. So thinking about culture as our primary driver rather than technology. And when we think about culture, understanding that to be people, policy, and process, and knowing that there's a lot that we can be doing to improve process and policy right now. Honestly, I've got no idea what that slide even means, Richard. I was on a roll there, and now I'm just like, I don't know what I was trying to say. I thought the next slide was going to be thank you, and I'm done, but it's not. Now that says thank you, then I'm done. I'll work that one out later.
It says questions. It's fine.
Yeah, questions.
We do have some really good questions, actually. So Lydia's asked, how do you balance follow-up and supporting people if they take one of those personal days versus letting them be to get the headspace they may need, given you won't see them in person and they could be really isolated?
Lydia, that's such a good question. So I'd say the first thing to consider is what the relationship is that you've got with that person. And typically the closest and tightest relationship is going to be with their line manager. You would hope. So we'd always leave it for the line manager to be that person that does that check-in, and to know and judge what the right level of check-in is. There are some people that actually, that they kind of just like to be left to their own devices. That's okay. There are also people that who like to be asked, hey, how are you doing? I hope you're okay. And so, I put all of the responsibility on the line manager there to make that judgment call, and just to be aware that people need different things, and to try and do right by what's relevant and appropriate for that person.
So great question, Lydia. Okay, the next one we've got is from Roger. Time off is something which my team have admitted to feeling daft in taking leave while we're all stuck at home. I've made it clear that switching off is even more important now than ever. From a policy point of view, how would you flex your leave policy to deal with these challenges?
Great question, Roger. And yeah, look, I completely advocate for what you've said, which is that time off and separation is even more important than ever. And the reason that is our place of work is also our place of relaxation at the moment. And that's really difficult. And not all of us have got a spare room to work in or a study, right? And so, I've got people on our team who are working in their bedroom. If that's also the place that they're kind of using to unwind, that's pretty intense. So creating space and creating rules to say, right, I'm now on holiday, or I'm now switching off, it's the end of the day, and being really strict with yourself in terms of doing that is really key. In terms of how we flex our policy, I think we've not made any adjustments to our holiday policy. We've let people cancel leave if they want to. we've let people take leave if they want to, and we've encouraged people to take it. I think one of the challenges I'm seeing from a lot of companies that we're speaking to is they're worried that there's going to be potentially a lot of holiday taken in the second half of the year. I think that's just something that we're going to have to be okay with. You know, it depends on what your outlook is. My outlook is we're in this for the long term. We're trying to build the best business we can over a period of time. And therefore, if that means that, yeah, we've got a bit of a quieter office for the second half of the year because more people are taking holiday, I think that's important, you know, and I want to prioritize everyone to do that. We will allow people to roll some over to next year as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say that. From our point of view, and I think what's kind of important is to not think that you've got a lot of staff which may have a lot of holiday to be taken in that last quarter, to flex more around actually could the rollover that normally is in place, or if you don't have any rollover, could that be the flex point? So actually rolling over more to the next year, just so you start to keep the kind of ability to the teams to work efficiently and effectively, but also to ease some of the pressures. So yeah, if you don't have a rollover within that company already in terms of holidays, to maybe think about how flexible you can be with that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, the next question we've got is from Jess. We're leaning on our line managers right now to be closest to their teams right now to help flag when people aren't doing well emotionally. How do you best equip your managers to be able to check in with their teams well and know when to flag things to the people on their team?
A really good question. So, you know, I think the first thing is just creating support for all of those managers. So all of our people leaders are coming together at 9:45 every morning just for a catch up and a natter, and typically we'll touch on, you know, how's everyone's teams doing? Is there anyone we need to be worried about? Is there anyone that we need to do something about? And just making sure there's a forum. That's the first thing. Making sure there's a forum for line managers and people that are responsible for people to share worries and concerns, because I don't think it shouldn't rest on one person. You know, we can share the responsibility, and I think talking about it often helps. You know, I think the second thing is, you know, there's some great solutions out there. So, you know, we use something called Spill, which is a kind of a digital therapy tool that companies can use. But also one of the things that we have within our product is the ability to run polls within the organization. And we're just about to launch some sort of COVID-19 mental health relevant polls, which are super aligned to where we find ourselves now. So, you know, those are kind of a light touch way of just checking in and seeing how everyone is doing and just trying to get a sense of the organization. There's no easy answer, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on line managers. And I think whoever's looking after those line managers needs to be really respectful of that, really appreciative of that, and also understand that, you know, no one's going to be perfect. And we just have to kind of take each day as it comes.
The next question we've got is from Paula. I know you said that now is not the time to start creating values, but do you think that the values and cultures of businesses will change when we come out of lockdown?
Absolutely. In the biggest possible way. I think we are heading towards a time where people will have to start taking culture really, really, really seriously. Because if you didn't invest in culture, and thinking about culture as those three things, people, process, and policies, values and behaviors being a subset of policies, then you probably really struggled because you didn't have those pillars to hold on to when all of this happened. So I think we're going to see that shift around a lot. I think the other thing we're going to see is people looking for jobs, asking interviewers how companies handled the coronavirus situation. How did leaders respond? Like, what are the decisions they made? How do they operate? I really think and believe that we will be judged for how we made the decisions that we made.
Next question is from Robin. There's a load of good questions in here, actually. I agree that culture is a vital, sorry, not mute. I agree that culture is a vital factor in success, but how many of your customers have an objective way of measuring it across the business, teams, and individuals, cultural, as opposed to operating performance?
Whoever asked this question, was it Robin or Robert? Robin, you're a smart human. Do you want to come and work with me? Some questions there aren't answers to, and I don't have an answer to that. We absolutely do not have an objective way of measuring culture. I think what we look at is those three component parts: people, policy, and process, and we can measure those. We can measure if we're doing those things, if we're not doing those things. We can measure employee NPS. We can do things there. So that's where our focus is. Culture is the end point. It's the bread that comes out of the oven after you've added those three elements and mixed it all together and put it in the oven, right? And so because of that, it becomes a very difficult thing to measure. But what we try and do is think about measuring those three elements and whether we're doing them or not, and how well we're doing them. And so staff surveys is a classic way that we do that.
Ian has asked, I agree the video conferencing is exhausting. I get to the end of the day and I'm shattered. You're my fifth or sixth today. Why are we finding it exhausting?
So my first thing, Ian, is like, why are you here? Like, log off now, leave. I don't know if I could do 5 or 6 in a day. Well, I hope you've got some kind of beer or large glass of red wine waiting for you after this. Why are we finding it exhausting? It's such a good question. And there's for sure smarter people out there who have probably studied this and written objective research on it. But I would say that if I was going to, share my own, I guess, personal opinion, is that there is an innate energy that we as humans get. And if I was reaching, I would suggest that's kind of like hormonal changes that happen when we come into contact with a person. There's an amazing book by Simon Sinek called Leaders Eat Last. And he talks a lot about oxytocin, which is this like love hormone. And it's released when you have a child. It's very much part of the kind of birth process. It's released when you breastfeed, but it's also released when you hug. And it can also be released from, positive human interaction. And I just think those biological, physiological responses that our bodies have are much more intensified when we're actually with someone in the flesh, as it were, as opposed to just staring at someone through a screen. I'm not getting as much energy from doing one-on-ones with my team and speaking to my team virtually as I do when I'm in a room with them. And when that energy isn't there to kind of balance the intensity of things, I think that's what we're finding it harder.
Ian wants me to tell you that he stopped drinking. Boo-hoo.
Ian, that's very clever. I'm trying the 1 glass rule. The reason I'm trying the 1 glass rule is I feel like I was slowly sliding into the kind of 1 bottle rule, which is like open a new bottle every night of the week. Sundays become Tuesday, Saturday is Wednesday. I don't know which day is the day. And so my wine rack, which did have probably like 40 bottles in it, now is like 10 or 15. So we've implemented the 1 glass rule, which is 1 glass a night maximum. And that's how I'm dealing with it. I wish I had the courage and stamina to give up drinking as you have. So you are braver man than me.
It's not the time for new challenges.
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe not.
Claire's asked, do you have any recommendations for handling staff morale at this time?
All the big questions, Claire. Wow. Give me 30 seconds. Okay, so I think there's a couple of aspects to this. The easiest way to make someone feel really bad about themselves is for you to pretend that you're okay when actually you're not. If the team in front of you are like, God, this is quite hard, and then you stand up and you're like, I'm amazing, I'm fine, I'm finding this really easy, they're going to feel pretty bad about themselves. And the reality is that no one's finding this easy, right? And I think the same goes just generally in life. Like leaders and managers, we sometimes have this thing where we feel like we have to be perfect, and we have to have the answers, and we have to be really, really good at our jobs. And the reality is, like Richard, I'm sure you're very good at your job, but I'm sure you're not perfect at your job. And I'm sure Sarah knows that.
Yes,
And yeah, and I'm sure the rest of your team know that. And that's okay, because we're humans and we're kind of fallible things, right? And that's all right. And so I think in terms of morale, where I always try and start with is just honesty and openness about, this ain't easy for me. I'm struggling, and I'm also not making every decision perfectly. That's the first thing. And then I think it's about being good at painting a picture of what comes next and what the future looks like. You know, I think as business owners, business operators, we have a responsibility to have a plan. Now, that plan doesn't have to be perfect, and that plan doesn't have to have all the answers, but it is our responsibility to have a plan. And so showing some kind of plan of, we think this is what the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months could look like, and what we want to do and what we want to achieve, I do think is important. And having those conversations is important, because we're going to be in this for a while, but it will pass. It will come to an end. And so having a appropriate conversation around that, I think, is really important.
That actually segues quite nicely into the next question from Harry. When the time's right, do you have any tips on how to begin transitioning employees back into the office, appreciating that there's going to be a lot of disruption, particularly from a performance and engagement point of view?
Yeah, so this is team members who are working from home. This is not furloughed team members.
We'll make that assumption. He's not quite gone into that detail, but
yeah. So I think if they're working from home and they're still working, they've not been furloughed, then I'd start thinking now about what your process is for bringing people back together. There's going to be a load of different aspects to that. You're going to have different ages across the organization. You're going to have different geographical setups. Some people can walk to work. That's a really stress-free way to get to work. I got to get on the Northern Line. Do you know how anxiety-inducing the Northern Line is? And that was before a pandemic. Now I've got to go and get on the Northern Line and stand like this close to someone breathing in my face. That's not a great experience. So you're going to have a real cross-section of the organization. And so you've got to think through what the experience is for everyone. And what I think it looks like is a staggered approach, right? The people that can come back to the office easily and they're able to will do that. You know, you might also have people living with individuals who are highly at risk, who can't come back into the office because they're still with someone that's at risk from getting coronavirus. So do you want to have different policies for different people? Do you want to keep everyone in the same situation? Those are all the things you've got to think through. I think the other thing we're thinking about is, you know, when the lockdown lifts, do we say, okay, we're going to give everyone a week to travel and to go around and see parents and see friends and just get stuff out of their system? You know, once if the lockdown is lifted on a Thursday and on, this is unlikely to happen, and on a Friday they say you can go back into offices, does everyone want to do that, or actually would they rather go and see their loved ones? And so I think you've just got to think through all of those different variables, and that's a lot to think through, and that's why you've got to start now.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. From our point of view, we're in the background starting to think about what that looks like and how that impacts each individual, so their setup, who they live with, whether they have health implications for that in terms of each person. So you have to kind of think about all of those things and then bring a plan together and then kind of say, this is what we're looking at to kind of the wider team. So that's like, for us, that's what we're working on.
Yeah, nice. That makes a lot of sense. And that's, there are just a lot of ramifications. And so it's not a thing we want to rush, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Sarah's got a great question. Do you have any recommendations for making sure that furloughed employees still feel part of the company culture?
Yes, I do. And I'll send Richard and Sarah a kind of asset that we made for a bunch of our customers, and for them to send out to like their furloughed team as just with some ways for them to stay involved. So I think the three key things that you need to have in your head in terms of, I guess the predominant challenges for a furloughed team member are, mental health, physical health, and financial health. Those are the three things that are probably going to be. That's my wife in the kitchen making her lunch. What are you going to make? What are you having for lunch? So you've got to think about those three things and be really aware of that. And so any advice and clarity and support that you can give furloughed team members, I'd give it around those three things: mental health, physical health, financial health. In terms of making them feel part of the culture, our advice has been, if you're having a company meeting, let them feel like they can join if they want to and participate and listen. If you're doing Friday drinks, let them join and be there to chat to people. They mustn't be working, but I think, joining full company events is a great way to keep them updated, and keep them part of the culture.
That's great advice. This is our last question, unless anybody else has got any more that pops up. Is endless documentation the best way to move towards asynchronous communication, or are there other better ways to embrace it effectively?
Good question. So I think the answer is endless documentation is not the way. It's not the only way. It's one way. So I've been using videos. So I'll just take my phone, stand it up. So one thing that we normally do is, after our board meetings, I send a kind of little update to the rest of the business. Like, what did the board ask us? What's the follow-up? What are we going to do differently? And, rather than write another email, I was like, you know what, I'll just send a video. And, video is better than words at kind of capturing where our head's at, how we're feeling, all that kind of thing. So I think that works really nicely. So, audio clips, video clips, and documents are the kind of three that I would think about.
Yeah, I also think doing it in one take. So if the first take has a few stumbles in it, where you're like, as a manager or as an owner of a business, that kind of having that honesty, just being kind of a person behind that, also helps. So, it doesn't have to be a professional setup when you're doing that video, of kind of a rundown of what's been covered, or just a all hands meeting or anything like that, from a rundown to the rest of the team. Do it in the first take and then send that instead of perfecting it. Yeah,
bingo. Yeah, you are completely right. I think that's really true. My email's on the slide. It's just ben@charliehr.com. As you can probably tell, I love chatting about this stuff. So if anyone had any more questions, or if you have a question a week and you want an opinion on it, feel free, drop my email down. I'm happy to support and answer where we can. And I'm excited for when this all is blown over and it is but a distant memory to us.
What's the first thing you're going to do when you're let out of your house?
Probably go see my parents. Probably go see my parents, go see my brothers, and then have brunch. I know that sounds weird, but I just miss. That's also the most millennial thing to say. I'm so embarrassed that I've just embarrassed myself in front of all your smart, intelligent customers listening. But yeah, probably have some avocado and some brunch and drink some coffee and read a magazine. However bad and bougie that sounds.
Ben, thank you so much for that. There was a lot of insight in there, and I think out of all the tech partner webinar series we've done so far, that's been the one that I've found most kind of insightful and like powerful, and like you can tell by the lack of drop off we've had going through the webinar series. It's been very, very good. So thank you for doing that. We'll follow up with, so everybody who's attended will follow up with the recording of this. We'll make sure those assets that you've got that you want us to send, so for the furloughs, and there was another one as well, we'll make sure those are all sent out, and we'll include your kind of contact details in that as well. But thank you so much for doing that, Ben. It was great to have you on, and I hope the rest of isolation passes as smoothly as possible.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, guys. Have a great afternoon, and maybe we can do this in real life one day.
Absolutely. You have to come join us in rainy Manchester.
Yeah, sounds good.
See you later.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.